Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Satran or Raf, curator from the Queen Sirikit Museum of Textiles. Welcome to the November special event, Conversation with Curators, which is a special event to welcome the third rotation of our royal treasure, the Javanese Batik collection of King Chulalongkorn of Siam. This month, we also have a good news for everyone who has been waiting to visit our museum or the Grand Palace in Bangkok, because we have been reopened since the 1st of November. Today we have a special conversation with our consultants who were working on this batik exhibition. The first is Del Caroline Gluckman, the co-curator. She worked as a consultant for our museum. The second is Dr. Maria Waworan too, an Indonesian who in love with Indonesian and Southeast Asia textiles. Also the chairman of Traditional Textile Art Society of Southeast Asia. And the last consultant is Dr. Sandra Nissen, the anthropologist and individual researcher from the Netherlands. We will talk about how they have been involved with this exhibition. But before that, I will introduce you a little bit about this exhibition. And do not forget to like and share this post to win the 2 tickets museum.
Our royal treasure, the Javanese Batik collection of King Chulalongkorn of Siam, is an exhibition dedicated to telling the story of His Majesty King Chulalongkorn's 3 trips to Java and his devotion to modernize Siam with Western technology and cultures. During all his visits, King Chulalongkorn visited a lot of businesses and observed modern technology at that time, such as railways, hospitals, and schools. His Majesty also showed a great interest in the history, arts, and cultures of Java. He visited many famous centers of batik production, bringing back a collection of 307 pieces, including several rare surviving examples. The collection was well preserved by the bureaus of the royal household and never been publicly displayed. Queen Sirikit Museum of Textiles was granted access to research and to display the batik collection from the 1st November 2018. So I will bring you to meet with our first guest, Del Caroline Gluckman. Let's see. Okay. And Del, your first question, could you tell us about this collection, because you recognize this collection before any of us did?
Well, the planning for the museum took quite a long time, of course. It was a very big project. And part of the process of thinking about the museum and looking to the future of when the museum was going to open was to determine what we were going to exhibit. First of all, we didn't know exactly what the collection would be, so that impacted designing the storage and the offices and the museum itself, because usually you have the collection and then you build the museum. This one we did the other way around, which was fine. It worked very, very well. And the second thing was, what are we going to show when it opens, especially the opening? It's a very important time. So looking toward that, several years ahead, we were taken into the inner court to see some of the things that belonged to the royal family, various rulers, various kings, and that had been in storage for a very long time, to begin to get some idea of what we might be able to show, or just a sense of the things that belong to the royal family that perhaps we might be able to show at some point, to tell a story about them. So we went into the inner court with the Acharn Smithy, who was to be the director and who unfortunately passed away, but he had wonderful access. He was very close to Her Majesty, and she granted him access to whatever he needed. So we went into the inner court with you and with other members of the team who then subsequently became part of the staff of the museum, and the future director, who's Piyavara Tikara Natanoy, the current director, who was with us, and it was very early on. So they started bringing things out to show us, and we were looking at them, and there were some Indian saris, and I said, I wasn't too surprised, but I said, where are these from? So they said, well, His Majesty King Chulalongkorn went to India and he brought back some saris. Okay, fine. And then they started bringing out batik, and I was literally in shock. For a moment, I thought, where am I? Am I in Thailand or am I in Indonesia? Why am I looking at batik? This doesn't make sense to me. My brain, for a minute, my brain was frozen. and of course, I recognized immediately they were Indonesian batik. I've done exhibitions of Indonesian batik. I'm very familiar with it. So I was quite startled. And so I said, what are where are these from? Why are we looking at them, basically? And they said, well, His Majesty went to Indonesia. He went to Java 3 times, King Chulalongkorn. 1871 was a very brief trip. Yes. 1896 and 1901. And these are some of the batiks he collected. Now, I had no idea there were more than 300. They showed us maybe 4 or 5, But I immediately said to Achan Smiti, I said, have these been exhibited? Do people know about these? And he said, no one has ever seen them. I told Dr. Madibel Gittinger from the Textile Museum, who was an Indonesian anti specialist. She did an exhibition on the textiles of both cultures, but she never saw them. And I confirmed that with her when I returned to the United States. And she said, I heard about them, but I never had a chance to see them. And I said, have they ever been exhibited? No. I didn't ask how many there were. Maybe I would have stopped right there because there are over 300. But I just turned to everybody, the team, and I said, you need to remember these. You need to know that these are here, and maybe someday we can do an exhibition and bring these out, because no one has ever seen them before. And many of them are, turns out, types of batik and examples that don't exist anymore. So that was the first time we knew that there was this collection, but we still didn't know how large it was. It turned out to be quite exciting, actually, and some really rare and important pieces. So that's how we and I said to everybody, now just remember this. And I was thrilled after the museum opened when we had our next meeting, because it's like the museums are like the theater. You're only as good as your last show. So as soon as the show opened, the museum was open, we had an opening, we had a conference, everything, it was gorgeous. Then we all got together and we said, okay, what are you going to do next? And I was really
that's why after we have the first grand opening of the museum, then you suggest us to do this exhibition.
Right, exactly. So then I was delighted to see that the staff had put this on the list as one of the batik, as one of the projects they wanted to do.
And after they'll suggest us to show this collection, then after that we decide to find someone who can help us for manage the study trip. And at that time, Maria is the one who come into mind, because I met Maria in Vietnam several years ago. And then she's also Indonesian, and also at that time she is a chairman of Ancient Tech at that time, right, Maria?
Yes.
And I tried to contact Maria and asking her, and she said yes.
Perfect choice.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
I was
she's
very excited when you asked me. Thank you so much for including me also, because it was such a great experience for me. I was excited since 2013 when you had the big seminar in Bangkok. And I asked it to my friends, I said, you have to see it because this is something that we don't know about this collection. And you introduced, Dale, you introduced us, the Indonesian, to this collection. And indeed, there were pieces I've never heard about. Van Lawik, Van Paps, you were the first one that told me about it. And it seems that she is a very, very good and excellent batiker. Yeah. Thank you so much for asking me and to join you. And it was my pleasure and an honor for me too. Yes. And I know this collection was important to Indonesia, to the history of batik, because your king was so precise that he wrote everything down on paper and pieces of paper and put it in the textiles. And that was never done before. The Dutch, they made reports on what they did because of their jobs. And some reported, like Juinbal reported on batik and so on. But that what His Majesty did was exceptional in my eyes then. Yeah. Well, anyway, I thought a lot about this collection, and it was amazing. It was amazing that you show us the pictures on that symposium. Well, how did I prepare for your trip to Indonesia? Well, first I read the book of Mrs. Imtip Parijoti Suharto, and then I started to make notes on which cities His Majesty saw and where he bought the batiks and what type he bought and so on. My next step was then I approached the key people in the field of batik and contacted Batik Centra, first in West Java and then later in Central Java and the North Coast. Yeah. Because I know that the sultanates in Jogja and Solo were important in the research, as His Majesty received many gifts from these principalities. Well, first of all, then I introduced you to Mr. Mas Bas. At that time he was the director or the head, the leader of the 4 principalities. So from Jogja 2 and from Solo 2. And then my criteria, how to select or for selecting the batik workshops you revisited was, first of all, it should be a long-standing batik workshop that have served probably the Kraton or other very important people for generations. And then the second criteria was the workshop has to be focusing on classic patterns or patterns that were important in that era, and also that the produces good quality batik. And from the prices that we see from the batiks that His Majesty bought, they were quite expensive. Some were very expensive, but beautiful. It's indeed beautiful. Yeah, and then, well, I wanted you also to meet, of course, batik collectors, because most of these collectors have masterpieces in their collection. So you met, I think, in Jakarta, several. You went, of course, to the museums, Textile Museum, later to the National Museum, and then also the Museum of Danar Hadi in Jogja, in Solo.
In Solo.
In Solo, yeah. And then in Jogja, we met Ibu Larasati Sulaiman. She, at that time, she was the drive, she was the motor behind all the batik production, and she also was an expert in making flower arrangements from coconut leaf. Yeah. So, but at that time, she was also one of the founders of Sekar Jagat, Segar Jagat is like Pasra Prema in Jakarta, is the enthusiasts, the people that love textiles, traditional textiles, not particularly batik, but also other songket and other weavings. Yeah. It was she that it was her initiative to invite batikers from Kebumen. Remember the Sirikit textile?
Sirikit, yes.
Yeah, in fact, a Sirikit the Sirikit was donated by the Dikranasta, that is the chair of the National Handicraft Committee in Kebumen. And the word Sirikit comes from Sri, S-R-I.
See?
Meaning beautiful. And kit, K-I-T, that means to bind. So Sirikit means something beautiful, which is binding or a bound unity of a variety or diverse beautiful things, which makes the unity even stronger. You know what I'm saying? So because these consist, the pattern consists of iso scale, right? Iso scale. So the two with two sides even measuring with even measurements, long, and then a small bottom. So in every iso scale is filled with, of course, there is a filler, and of course there is flora, fauna, or other things, and it all has a meaning. The fern leaves, for instance, symbolizes dynamism and strength. Flowers like clove flowers or coffee flowers symbolize the fragrance of aromatic flowers, which is beneficial for one's well-being. So everything has to do with beauty. So, and the background usually is filled with also fillers like bras utah. Bras utah is scattered rice kernels. Scattered rice kernels are a symbol of wealth, of prosperity. And it can be also like ginseng. The background is filled with ginseng or fish scales. These motifs are believed to protect the wearer from illness. See? And then you visited also workshops. And how did I choose the workshop? Well, first of all, I look at the workshop that are special because of the workmanship. Have been long in existence. Like in Cirebon, we went to Jenny Batik Cirebon. Her father was one of the first, and it got the license to produce batik for the Kraton in Cirebon. Also, by the way, the Sultan Kasunanan in Cirebon also passed away this year. Yeah. And then in Pekalongan, we visited Cahyo. His specialty was the development in dyeing. So he can dye on one side red, and on the other side in the back can be blue or green or any other color. And later we visited Dudu. He is creative, and his creative developments exploring the parang motif. I think you have one of his stoles. Eh?
Yeah. Yes, actually, I have two. I love
his two.
Yes.
They're beautiful.
They're gorgeous, and I always get compliments when I wear them.
Yes, very finely done. Yeah. And then we went also to see the Chinese batikers, Limping Wei, and also Uisu Chun. They're both still working and still existing, and they're doing good business. Uisu is going down a bit because now the waiting time for one to when you order one, you commission one, is 5 years. When I commissioned one, it was only 2 years. Now it's 5 years. Yeah, 5 years. But still beautiful work. Yeah, and they still limping we do batik chops, a lot of batik chops, very full and for the Chinese community. We also went to Lassem, to the workshop of Sirikit, Pak Sirikit. Remember him, the old man? Yeah, he was Chinese, but his wife was Indonesian. He passed away in June of this year. And then also to Studio Ong Maranatha and Studio Purnomo. They're doing okay now. But, during this COVID time, everybody suffers, especially in the batik industry. And in Yogyakarta, first of all, we went to Ibu Hani. Ibu Hani, she went to the opening, Vinoto Sastro. Her workshop was very good, very big, very nicely arranged. And she is the third generation, I think, of batikers. So, yeah. And then we also visit the Imogiri batikers, the traditional batikers. Yeah. We made a visit to courts of Sultan Hamengkubuwono and Adipati Paku Alam, of course. And in Solo, but I didn't join you for that. You went to Batik Gothic Swan, is that correct?
Gothic Swan.
Yes.
Gothic Swan,
yes.
Yeah. Arjonagoro, yeah. Yeah, it's still in existence. It's now continued by his adopted son, Arjo Suwarno, and his wife, Supia. Okay. Well, another great experience for me was, of course, the commissioning of the Dodot.
Yes.
You remember? You said me, is it possible to order such a exceptional, huge batik? And said, well, I think so. Well, let's ask. So I approached, because you showed me the picture of His Majesty in Japanese royal attire. Yeah.
Yes.
And the first thing that came to mind was Ibu Muriwati. Ibu Muriwati, she's the sister of Hamengkubuwono, the Sultan, the current Sultan now. But she passed also this year. So Ibu Muriwati, her batik shop is called Sekar Kedaton. She's a batiker and one of the sisters of the current Sultan. She was a key person in combining His Majesty's jacket with the dodot, preparing the royal accessories, and finalizing the royal attire for display. Yes, there it is. I can remember she told me that the parang was 22 centimeters big.
Wow.
It's the biggest that I've ever seen. And everybody, when it was made, everybody asked her, who ordered that? And everybody thought that it was the Sultan. That it was made for the Sultan. I said, and they said, no, that is an order from abroad. They say they said who it was, but it's an order from abroad. But yeah, her workshop is big, so you can spread it out because it has to be spread out and dried in the sun and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I showed you some pictures, or I sent you some pictures about how they rolled it up, after the drying, they rolled it up, and 7 people had to carry it. 7 people. Yeah.
I think I have that photographs because Ibu sent me some photograph of the process for this dodot.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, the dodot was made by Ibu Hani for Ibu Muriwati. Yeah. So, but it was made in her workshop. Yeah, because she was talking all the time about it, and and she was so proud that she was able to perform so well and had this beautifully done. Well, that was my great experience of the dodot. Yeah.
I will show you some of the photograph when we install this mannequin. Yes, we have two staff from the palace of Jogja.
Oh, where is this? Is this in Thailand or is this
in Thailand? In our museum.
Yes. So the people came from Jogja to dress the mannequin up.
Yes,
correct?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and they said you have to you're not allowed to let this touch the floor. I mean the tail of the dodo touch the floor. So when you see the photograph, you can see the staff of the palace holding the tails in his hand. That's why. But at first we didn't realize in this photograph. So that's why this mannequin, we have to use the mannequin's hand to hold the tails of Dodo.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that either. I didn't know that.
I didn't know it either. Yeah. So we have to fix it. Back to the question. In the first trip, we had a chance to meet with Judy Akiari. He's then became one of the person who helped us research his piece in this collection. And she also wrote the description of the pieces for the catalog, along with the description of the batik, as well as other special information related to the batik collection. And we have a chance to meet her in our first trip when we have a try at the Textile Museum.
Yes. Yeah, Dale had the presentation, Yeah.
Right? I
remember that,
And she's the one who was very important.
Well, yeah, I think so, because she is quite knowledgeable about not only traditional textiles, but also batik, So, I hope, and I think she did a good job. Because it's in Indonesia, it's difficult to find somebody who can speak very well English and also explain all the labels, explain all the textiles and put it in nice wordings. So I think she did a good job. Yeah, she was good.
When we were in Bangkok.
Yes, this is in Bangkok.
Yes. And for the next question, for Sandra, could you tell us a little bit about how we met with Sandra by chance at the National Archive in Jakarta, where the team went to do research with Maria, Dale, and Maria already know Dr. Sandra Neeson, and immediately they recognized her at the archive, where they introduced her to the rest of the QSMT team.
Yes, that was an exciting meeting, Ravi. Talk about pure happenstance. And of course, that kind of wonderful synchronicity happened so many times during the trip. But before I go into that, I just want to say that for me as well, this research project was one of the most exceptional ones I've ever been involved with in my life, if not the most exceptional. And I think I'm so pleased to hear that whole discussion around the dodot and the batik and how you set up the exhibition, because I think through that, our audience gets a sense of how incredibly detailed and careful this whole project has been. And the fact that we had those trips together through Java, that we were all able to see the collections, it made us into a team. It made us into a team that understood each other's roles, and we were in synchrony and empathetic with each other's needs and tasks. And the museum was incredibly accommodating for us, and it was in general, a very convivial and pleasant research experience. And that was the case right from the very beginning, because I happen to be in Jakarta. I work in North Sumatra. I work on batak, not batik. And by chance, I had been doing a research project on Jasper and Piangadi, because they made a very exceptional 6-volume work on craft in Indonesia and Netherlands, East Indies. And so I had been doing research on Jasper and Piangadi. And in the context of that, I decided to go to the National Archives. And that was just an arbitrary day that I selected. And the curator there, the archivist, said to me, do you know that you have friends here from the United States? And I thought, sure, right, probably people from the States, but I won't know them. And then he said, Dale Gluckman. I thought, too amazing for words. And Dale and and I met you there, Rafi. I think that was the first time, no? And
yes,
and
right.
Well, Maria, and also Melissa.
Mhm.
And we just had a nice little chat, sort of, hey, what's been happening to you in the last 10 years? Because we hadn't met in all that time. And Dale said to me, Sandy, do you know anything about Van Lauwijk van Pabst? Well, as it turns out, I knew somebody where I live in the Netherlands. I live in Oosterbeek, right beside Arnhem. And I know the Van Lauwijk van Pabst street. And I know the name Van Lauwijk van Pabst. It's a name of a very, very high status family. That's why this street is named after this family in Arnhem. And Dale said, we can't find anything on our boutique owner, our workshop owner, Van Lauwijk van Pabst, Mrs. Do you think you could help us? Because I speak Dutch. I live in the Netherlands. And I was very nonchalant. I said, Dale, no problem. I've come from Canada. I live in the Netherlands. I've spent years working on my own family history. I go to the archives regularly. I love it. If you have any questions about Van Lauwijk van Pabst, just ask me. So Dale eventually did write and say, can you find out anything? Because we know this, this, and this. And at the time, we were all under the impression, probably from Harman Feldhausen's book, that Van Lauwijk van Pabst was a Dutch woman and she had an atelier in Jukja. And so from my nonchalance, yes, I can find information in the archives. I went to the archives, I studied Google, I worked very hard on this project and I didn't find anything. I was most upset and I thought, I'm going to destroy Dale's trust in me. But I found, a few things of genealogical nature that were in Dutch, but really nothing at all about the batikster. I don't quite know how it morphed, but in the end, it was probably one of the most rewarding research projects I've ever done, also because it was so difficult. It was like finding a needle in a haystack, because our Mrs. Van Lauwijk van Pabst turned out to be not a Dutch woman who, like an Indo, half Dutch, half Indonesian. It turned out to be probably a concubine who was living with a high status civil servant. And when his wife died, his Dutch wife died, a few years later, his out-of-wedlock children, he claimed to be part of his lineage. And then he even married his bijslaap, we say in Dutch, I guess, his concubine, his local woman. And she was clearly an incredibly talented person, very smart. She ended up in total having 11 children with this man, and they obviously had a very strong relationship. And eventually, what I found out about her came through sifting through the archives and primarily old Dutch newspapers, where I found out about the male members of her family, where she might have been, by allusion or by deduction, I could determine something about her. From how we met to how I ended up being part of the project and traveling with you, that's a very complicated story. I mean, traveling with you too, I did hope to find things in Jogja. I hope to run into people in Jogja who maybe remembered Mrs. Van Lauwijk van Pabst, because you have to think that twice the king visited her workshop. And so it wasn't just any old workshop. They really selected the very best workshop in Jogja for him to visit. And he was very taken with the batiks, and he purchased a lot twice. And he was very deeply under the impression of her work. And then I found it so amazing to go to Jogja and find absolutely nobody who still remembered her. We didn't leave a stone unturned. We went to archives, we visited people on the streets, we visited the Chinese community there. I even walked along the Jode River looking for a place where her batik workshop may have been located, because from the old archival material I found, it seems that she was located close to the river. And that makes sense because she needed the water to do her dye work and to wash the batik and so forth, and to clean the textiles before before dyeing them and so on. So, and there are still batikers living there along the Jode River, but nobody could remember from Lawick, from Pabst. I do remember the time, eventually we did find a crumble that turned into a very important little piece of information. It's when we were in the Pakualaman Kraton, the archivist said to me on the QT, very subtly, by the way, I think we have an archive about a person named Manchi Lawick. Would you be interested? And I thought, Manchi Lawick, Manchi van Lawick. Ah, and so she dug up this archive for me, and it was a pot of gold. I mean, it was just one of those moments where it's eureka and you want to run through the streets and say, look what I found, or look what's been given to me. It was an archive about research that had been done on batik studios or batik workshops in Yogyakarta towards the end of the century, in which I found out, you know, a little bit more about the background of the batikare and the fact that it had existed. That complemented so much of what I've been able to find through researching the men in Mrs. van Lawick van Pabst's family. In the end, I'm so grateful to Dale because I was the anthropologist in the group. I had my nose in the newspapers online from the Netherlands East Indies. The whole trip, we would travel during the day, and at night I would just comb these newspapers and look for details. And not knowing batik, it was Dale who could put together the batik information with the archival information I was finding, and that synergy was wonderful. And so in the end, my piece in the book and my contribution to the research that we did was really because of my knowledge of Dutch, because of my proximity to the archives in the Netherlands, because of my proximity to the museums in the Netherlands, which we also visited, and I guess tangentially, because of our research in Jogja, which didn't turn up much information, but gave me a sense of the times and the feel for those times, I was able to put together the story in our book. So that's a long story about how we met, isn't it? I remember Maria discovering that, and we were having lunch together in Jogja, and you said, Manchi Lawick, that's a Chinese name. I think there was a triple entendre there because it wasn't just Manchi Lawick, which is how she referred to herself, but there was a Chinese overtone there.
Yeah, the name Chi is usually sister in Chinese. Yeah, Manchi. What's the MAN then? Well, it was quite a puzzle for us, huh? But yeah, it turned out so beautiful.
Yeah. And then there was a time that we discovered that it wasn't just Manchi Lawick, the wife of this CNH van Lawick van Pabst of high status, but in fact her first daughter was also named Manchi from Wilhelmina Frederica. And so we were dealing with two women, not one, who had the same name. And that was very confusing in the beginning because I thought, you know, how could she be still alive after her death date? And, you know, there were all kinds of contradictions that I was coming across in the archives. And eventually it turned out to be 2 people. And the second one, the daughter, died a mere 4 years after the first one died. So the first one died at a great old age, close to 80, and the second one died when she was in her 50s. So, she didn't live to be a great age of her mother. But it was fun to find out information about them in the archives and to realize that they were larger than life. I think they were real lively characters in Jogja. They didn't just have a batikare, and they must have been women of taste, and they had lots of servants. It had nothing to do with batiking themselves. They just had the staff and the capacity to pull together the people who could make wonderful batiks and the people who could make wonderful dyes, and they had the location and so on, the means essentially to put together a really good batik workshop also with the designers. But they also had a bakery, and then they were involved in all these festivals in Jogja where they would sell their baked goods on the street. And a son had a melkere, so that means something to do with, milk production, must have been for agriculture, and another son had to do with wood. So they were obviously
everywhere. Yeah, because of this big family.
Yeah.
And I wrote to you also about the book that I read during that time frame, and she was mentioned in the book, but she was mentioned as a matchmaker in Jogja. I don't know if this is true, but it's a book because the book bears my names. I will show you later. But
it wouldn't surprise me because they also had a hotel. And she was the grande dame in the hotel, and she would come out and meet the people, her patrons. And apparently the daughter was a bit of a live wire too. She used to do theatrical performances and keep her audience in stitches with laughter. So they were women of note, and everybody who was anybody knew them. I think that, you mentioned, Maria, people like Jan Bol and all these, important Dutch men who came and so-called, were the authorities and talked about it. Well, they must have got their information from her, and all of them must have known her. Groningen, Jasper, Pleite, all of those Dutch people who wrote about batik, I'm sure consulted the Van Lauwik van Pabst Batikere and maybe her staff and herself and her daughter and so on. And it's unfortunate we don't have the women's side of that story. We got as close to it as we could, but that's pretty well lost with the sands of time. But through that, we see how incredibly patrilineal, patriarchal the Dutch colonial time was, and how women just got disappeared. And it was luckily that we had this king of Thailand who gave a brooch and a bracelet to the Van Lauwik van Pabst women. That's the first time we got a notion that there were 2 women. And there must have been 2 because there were these 2 wonderful jewels that were given to them, pieces of jewelry. The king acknowledged these 2 women, but the Dutch archives hadn't until he did. So that got us off on the right foot there. And also his mention of the batikere and visiting, and it's so curious too, where he says he visited the Dutch woman's house. And so then that fit with our preconceived notion that Mrs. Van Lauwik van Pabst was a Dutch woman. You can imagine her wearing the skirts and having the accent and doing the Dutch high-class woman thing. And it turns out, she was Chinese, and to match her status, she would have dressed as a European, and even the king then referred to her as a European. So there were lots of things to sleuth out and try to understand what was going on in terms of status and gender in the Netherlands East Indies to try to figure out who she was. Oh, this is neat because we can see the wonderful hand script, handwriting,
yes.
Thank you, of W. Lauwik van Pabst. And you see that wonderful Dutch flowing script. And then you know this is a person who's educated, And this was probably, we assume from this, that this would have been written by the daughter. So when the king visited, the mother was quite old and probably said to her daughter, please look after the king's needs. And this is the result of that. But it's wonderful to see her handwriting. We assume it's her handwriting. Well, of course, it's her signature. By the way, she also, as far as we know, signed at least 2 textiles, because just at the turn of the century, it was becoming a Dutch and Indo thing to sign batik. And so 2 later batiks from the studio are in the Museum Gajah, the National Museum of Indonesia, which have her signature on the batik.
Oh, really?
That's really exciting because none of our pieces have her signature, but those 2 pieces do. And that may be a clue for other people who might have these wonderful textiles still in their closets in Indonesia to please inspect. If you see it from our please let us know, because we'll be able to add to our compendium and understand better the kind of progression, because she even eventually started to work with a chop, with a stamp. And she went with the times in many regards.
I would like to add how we came to know that it was Van Lauwik van Pabst. It turns out that the collection had an inventory list with it that was made, I'm assuming it probably from the 1896 trip, okay? And most of the tags are written in English and
Thai.
Okay, and they give the price, which right away is an extremely valuable piece of information, because rarely do historic textiles come basically with a price tag. And a little description of the pattern and what the object is and so on. But then there were a series of little pieces of paper like the one on the screen. And I stared at them and read them, and I finally could decipher the signature. It took me a little while. I had never seen her actual written signature or her daughter's written signature. And I realized it said W. V. Lauwik V. Pabst. And this rang a bell. And I remembered that Harman Veldhuizen, in his book, Batik Belanda, in the back of the book had pictures of the 2 pieces first pieces we know of that were signed with her signature in batik, and it said Van Lauwik van Pabst, but there was no information about who this person was or anything. And they were in the National Museum. So then when I went back to look at this signature, then I realized it was the same signature, basically. However, at the time that the king bought the bulk of his pieces from her, which would have been in 1896, mostly only on the North Coast were people signing their batik sarongs and kain panjang with a signature in batik on it, right? And of course, we have the wonderful Jan's pieces that the king bought in 1901 that have her signature on it, which are very important. Because in the earlier days, they didn't sign in wax. They pinned a piece of paper with their name and maybe the name of the pattern and the price and so on. And of course, this is exactly what that is, except I'd never seen an example of that. I knew about them. Harman writes about them. Other people write about them, that there were these signature papers, but none had been known to survive. And I realized that's what I was looking at. That's what these were. They are these signature papers that kind of, to some degree, predate signatures in wax. Not totally, but probably overlapping. But this is the older style. And that was extremely exciting. And it also gave us the name of the workshop, the owner of the workshop, W. van Lauwek van Paps, which we otherwise wouldn't have had, because not a single piece in the collection, and there's more than 30 pieces that are from this workshop, all of which are stunning, but none of them have a wax signature. So that's what led us to Van Lauwek van Pabst in the first place, the name. And I had already been thinking that Sandy would be, I had met Sandy many years ago and knew her well. And I was thinking she's really a good researcher. She's trilingual, maybe quadrilingual, and English, Dutch, Indonesian, probably some local Batak vocabulary as well. You know, she's just wonderful. She's such a great researcher. She would be the perfect person. I had already been thinking this before you walked out of the archive. So there were many serendipitous occasions and occurrences that really helped make this project as magical as it was. I had no idea how long it takes to really do an exhibition where you're not given the known information already. I mean, if you're doing an exhibition, you know, on Picasso, there's a lot of information out there. But if you're textiles, they don't come with prices. They often don't come with names or labels. Depends, of course, on what they are and when they were made. But particularly Indonesian batik doesn't necessarily, until you really begin to do the research, speak to you in that way. And till we pulled it all together, because we were working in Thailand, Indonesia, and Holland, in the Netherlands. And it's because this project was important not only for Thais. First of all, the textiles are gorgeous, but it's also, so you don't have to know anything about batik, or you just stand there in awe because they're so beautiful and the story is so interesting. But it's a story for Thailand, because of course it was King Chulalongkorn who made this collection and made comments about it and so on, and his people kept the records at his direction. But it was also an important story for Indonesians, because it's very much Indonesian heritage. And Sandy, I think you wanted to add something.
Yes, I want to say, Dale, that it was very important for the Netherlands too.
Yes.
Because, and I realized during this project, as I realize often during fieldwork, it's the process that's the product as well as the product. So the exhibition is exquisite, the book is exquisite, but the whole journey had so many spin-off good things happening. For instance, it reminded your discussion about the first batik examples from Lauwek of this as well. You have said that the collection had really exquisite Van Lauwek van Paps batik. But more than that, they're the only whole Van Lauwek van Paps batiks. And when Pleite was gathering for the World Fair, collecting for the World Fair in Paris in what was it, 1890 or 1900? 1900. He probably through connections, through these important Dutch people that I mentioned, like Groneman, or maybe also members of the family, he decided to go to the Van Lauwek van Paps Batikerij workshop in Jogja and commission them to make all of the known patterns that were typically Jogja. And he was, in the typical Dutch way of the time, documenting batik throughout Java. And so he wanted to have each city, each region, what patterns are typical of that region. So Van Lauwek van Paps was tasked with making batik from Jogja, and she made 175 different patterns. That was her repertoire, which is amazing. And all of them were the size of handkerchiefs. And well, that's what the Dutch call them, handkerchiefs, but they were in fact the size that were used by batik workshops at the time as a kind of mnemonic device, a memory archive. If somebody comes to you and asks for a certain kind of batik, then you go through your samples, they're samplers, and you select what the person selects what they want, and then you can use that as your pattern, probably also for the people doing the actual batiking.
Mm-hmm.
So what they had in Holland was all of these samplers, and we were able to look at all of them and put them beside this amazing collection in the palace in Thailand, and to realize what the whole batik looked like of a superb quality. Well, that was just wonderful for the Dutch Museum, and also we shared everywhere we went information images of the batik. And just as Maria was saying that this dodot was redone, which is amazing because they were just such exquisite dodot. We hope that many of the patterns which we gave to people like Ibu Hani can be replicated again. And we found that the people in Java, in more places, were very enthralled looking at what the king had seen in Java 100 years earlier. Mm-hmm. So it was a spark, Amongst ourselves, we were an international group. We have somebody from the States, somebody from Indonesia, people from Thailand, somebody from Holland, and Judy Achiadi from Canada, and me from Canada as well. There were all sorts of these other connections happening behind the scenes. But also with the batik itself, it was creating sparks everywhere we went. That was lovely to see.
So before the end of this conversation, I would like to let everybody invite other people who never visit to our museum or who still waiting to see the last rotation of our exhibition to come to see this exhibition in Bangkok. Start with Dale, my co-curators.
We'll do our best.
Yes, you can not only see the batiks, obviously, in person, and they're really stunning and interesting. There's a huge variety, but also there are maps and there are videos, and it really, I think, from watching people go through the show, they really were fascinated, and they came away learning and understanding and appreciating batik and history and the relationships between Thailand and Indonesia, and so many things that maybe they hadn't thought about before. So I really recommend the show. It's not a static exhibition in any way. It's very digitally, informationally active, which is good. And the pieces, of course, are absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, and the batik pieces are also a big inspiration to batikers nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And to artists of many kinds.
Yeah. And artists too, because they say, hey, that's beautiful, and we can do that too. And so it becomes an inspiration for them. They're inspired by this book and by all these pieces,
And I have to thank the curators of this exhibition, Rafi and Dale, for your decision to include a really large, excellent photograph of each piece, because this is really a once-in-a-lifetime chance. If you go to the exhibition, you can see the pieces. That's terribly exciting because you probably won't get the opportunity again. These pieces do not belong to the museum. They're on loan from the palace. And it's also, we have to thank the palace for giving us permission to show them. Right. And seeing them is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And then to have the catalog document them so well, it prolongs that opportunity for everybody to be able to gain access to these amazing textiles. So thank you to Rafi and Dale for that incredibly important decision, and also the museum for being willing to support that incredibly important decision.
In the name of Queen Sirikit Museum of Textiles, we have to thank for everyone, all of the consultants who help us for making this exhibition.
Thank you so much for including me.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
It's been a
thank
pleasure.
you.
And it's been a joy to work with all of you.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you so much,
bye, everyone.
everybody. Thank you, Rafi.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Yeah, bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching Conversation with Curators today. For more information about our activities, please follow us on Queen Sirikit Museum of Textiles Facebook, Instagram, or Line. And thank you.